Hey, I'm Pixel, and as you just saw, this stuff can pump out quite the chunk of damage. So let's get to the point. Dragonfly Spec is fixed. I figured I'd make this video because I couldn't find a result on Google or YouTube about this topic, only really about it being broken, though I'm sure it's in some Bungie patch notes somewhere. As you can see, Dragonfly hit for 836 damage. The highest I saw was 926 with the Scions being completely shoulder to shoulder. And as you'll see, the maximum damage on these Scions from Dragonfly with Dragonfly Spec equipped seemed to be around 1360. Compared to the 926 damage, this is a 46.8% increase. So around 50% more raw damage for all intents and purposes, because the 1360 seemed more consistent, whereas 926 was pretty much best case scenario. This can easily be the difference between some mobs living with a slither of health and being wiped out outright. So, now that we've got a rough idea of how this mod performs, I'll give you a demo clip of a tier 1 Blindwell solo to mull over in the background while I run through the details with you, so you can see how it performs in practice. Okay, so, about the Dragonfly Spec mod. In short, on any gun with Firefly, it is good. With the Oxygen SR3, it's busted, and you should 100% use it over the Miner Spec mod if you have it. Now, in detail, as we've established, Dragonfly Spec is about 50% more raw damage. But what that doesn't take into account is the extra damage that the increased range provides. It also doesn't take into account the increased kill radius, where enemies won't be left with a sliver of health instead of being blown to smithereens. And within that same vein, it doesn't take into account that it also puts a few select enemy types onto Dragonfly's potential one-hit list. The TLDR is that it's good, and better than the 50% damage may suggest. This next bit doesn't really apply to fast-firing weapon types like auto rifles, but instead it does apply to hand cannons, pulse rifles, and scout rifles. It's with regards to Miner Spec. So, as you may know, Miner Spec is around a 7 to 8% damage increase against red bar enemies. While this seems small, in the case of some hand cannons or scout rifles, this can be the difference between killing your target in one shot, or having to take the time to put a second round in their LP mug. Useful indeed. But, if it has Firefly on it, Dragonfly Spec can be the difference between wiping out an entire group of mobs, and leaving half of them alive with a fraction of their hit points remaining, which will result in you having to fire 1 or 2 extra rounds into the group to finish them all off, instead of just the one bullet to kill them all. But this does make the mod situational, in fact about as situational as the perk itself. So, to speak the obvious, which one is better depends. It depends whether there are absolute hordes of enemies, or if they are dotted around the place. It also depends if you are using a gun with an impact rating that can't one-shot all trash mob types. If you are using a high-impact hand cannon with Dragonfly Spec is certainly for you. If you're using a 140 round per minute scout rifle, otherwise known as high-impact frame, again, Dragonfly Spec is for you, no questions. However, in situations where you might be using a 180 round per minute scout rifle, things get dicey, and you might be better off using Miner Spec, and that's because it becomes unable to kill certain enemies in one precision hit. Enemies like goblins, hobgoblins, fallen vandals, and many others. And that's when the "it depends" really kicks in, because Dragonfly Spec will still be very good against large groups of enemies. But if they aren't grouped up, it's borderline worthless, and you will probably be better off being able to kill some things in one hit that you weren't able to before. So tailor your mod to the activities that you intend to use that weapon for. With that said and out of the way, I will say, the Oxygen SR3 is quite the spectacular exception, despite firing at 180 RPM, because that 50% extra damage on this Dragonfly is insane. It can be the difference between obliterating almost everything inside a sizable blast radius, and leaving a bunch of enemies on the edge just barely alive. And with how the Mega Neuro perk works, requiring 2 shots to kill a target can be useful for stacking the perk buff to ×2 rather than ×1, which may enable you to wipe out more targets with an explosion, which would not have died should you have had the perk at 1 stack. Not to mention, yes, it can even one-shot stuff like wizards in the right circumstances while running on primary ammo. And if you've got a beefy target in the middle of a bunch of trash mobs, by the time you handle the little guys, the big guy is likely to already be dead, or a bullet or 2 away from eating dirt. I hope this allows you to figure out whether you should use Dragonfly Spec or Miner Spec on your primary weapon of choice with Dragonfly. But hey, I'll let you watch the rest of the gameplay, and I'll let you decide whether you want to grind the strikes for the OSR3, although I think you should.